Boy, I sure do love Monster Hunter. In fact, the only thing I love more than Monster Hunter is complaining about the fucking thing. Longsword. Ugh. This is the most broken weapon in the game. I can't believe Capcom let this thing exist. Did they even playtest the damn thing? What were they thinking? You know, back in my day, the longsword never used to be like this. It was actually a pretty simple weapon. It was mostly just managing a gauge with a simple but intuitive moveset. Every new iteration would usually expand on this premise a bit, like letting it Fate Slash left or right instead of just behind, or letting you follow up with a Spirit combo after a Fate Slash. At the same time though, a lot of other weapons were gradually introduced in the series that had similar mechanics to the longsword. And it's not like the other pre-existing weapons weren't developing too. By 4 Ultimate, pretty much every weapon had grown into their own niches. Dual Blades was the fast, hyper-aggressive weapon. Greatsword and Hammer had their own flavors of hit-and-run tactics. Glaive was the mounting weapon. S-Nest was a Swiss Army knife. Switch Axe and Charge Blade had the whole weapon morphing thing going on. Hunting Horn had support. Lance was defensive. Gun Lance sucked my cock. But Longsword was in this weird spot where it didn't really have a strong niche. It was just kind of a beat stick. It didn't help that so many other weapons had similar mechanics to the Longsword too. Switch Axe had a meter, Gun Lance had a meter, Insect Glaive had a meter, fucking Dual Blades had a meter. Some of these weapons got whole new movesets from managing their meters too. All Longsword got was a linear combo and a damage boost. It wasn't bad or anything, but it definitely started to feel a lot more bland compared to everything else. Fate Slashing feels like chump shit when there's a billion other moves that functionally do the same thing. In Double Cross, they had the idea of giving Longsword a counter in Valor mode, and they gave it this cool ass hunter art that makes my penis hard every time I go off a tail with this thing. I guess Capcom really liked this direction, because when World came out they gave the Longsword a huge glow up. It got Foresight Slash, which drained all your mirror to use, but gave it all back if you timed it right and landed the counterattack. You could also use it to level up your gauge quicker too. It got a Special Sheath that came with new follow-ups, including another counter that leveled your gauge down if you mistimed it, but had the potential to deal some decent damage if you timed it correctly. It also got the Helm Breaker. Oh! The cool thing about all this though is that all of these were additions to the kit it had in 4U. You could still run around and play it like it was in the older games, but there was this new skill ceiling with the weapon that rewarded more patient and reactive play, while maintaining your standard attack flow. For the first time in like 6 games, the Longsword finally found a niche as the counter weapon. And people fucking hated it! What the fuck is this shit? I can dodge through stuff now and do this risk-reward bullshit? Why did they do this? It's overpowered. Counters are literally overpowered. Except for when the Lance does it. It's okay because the Lance sucks. What other weapon in the game can just sit there and be untouchable while dishing out truckloads of damage? What the fuck is that? Guns don't exist in Monster Hunter. Get that shit out of here. Jesus Christ. Speaking of damage, have you seen the damage on this thing? Look at it. Look at the damage! Here, just to prove a point, let's pull up speedrun averages, just to show you how much more efficient this thing is at killing stuff compared to your weapon. Well, alright, in surprise of absolutely nobody, Longsword ranks at, oh my god, it's mad! Fuck me, it's barely ahead of my main. That's not good. I thought this thing was supposed to be overpowered. Like yeah, Foresight Slash has a lot of iframes, but still drains your whole meter just to use it. And if you miss that follow-up attack, you're stuck pissing in the woods until you can get some of it back. It can also get caught by follow-up attacks, and using it against projectiles usually means you're out of range for the counterattack. In situations like these, I'd rather have a shield and just hold down R2. As flashy and cool as the Helm Breaker is, it's also a big investment to use and a big commitment to perform, so it's not like you can spam the thing. If anything, it's one of the healthiest additions to the Longsword's kit, since it gives the players the option to spend their meter on high burst damage or maintaining it for the attack boost. EI Spirit Slash is cool as hell to pull off, but punishes you so hard for missing it that deters a lot of people from using it. It's a lot safer to cash that meter in on a Helm Breaker than risking it all on a botched counter. Hell, even if you pull it off correctly, there's a chance you end up whiffing anyway if you're countering a moving target. And regardless of whether or not you pull it off correctly, the move still has massive end lag that leaves you wide open to follow-up attacks. Wait, what am I saying? I'm supposed to hate this weapon. It's overpowered. It has to be. Reddit told me so. And Reddit would never lie to me. Because see, I finally figured it out. When people say Longsword is overpowered, they're not talking about World. They're talking about Rise. And everybody knows Rise sucks. I know, because people keep making YouTube videos pitting the two games against each other, despite the fact that both games have very different goals, technical limitations, and design philosophies. World good, Rise bad. Longsword got two major buffs in Rise. Quick Sheath was changed so that you could enter the special sheath much faster than before. NDI Spirit Slash was reworked so that you wouldn't lose gauge if you mistimed it. You would also gain a level of gauge if you timed the counter properly and hit the monster with the counter attack. And you could also chain multiple special sheaths together back to back after performing successful counters. And with that, Longsword became the bestest, most broken weapon in the game. Nothing could compete with the amount of damage this thing could dish out. Just look at this graph. See? It's the best. It was so good that YouTubers were able to beat Apex Rathian with it.
Now, Uncle Zen said, I want to see all these YouTubers that claim the Longsword to be broken doing emergency quests with Longsword and absolutely destroying the monsters. This Longsword arguments have become too stupid. Now, before we go any further into this video, I want to make one thing perfectly clear. If you try to find Uncle Zen in my comment section and start posting nasty stuff at him, most likely I'm going to ban you from the channel.
Somebody get this spook out of my motherfucking chat, you dumb black ass coon. Get the fuck out of my motherfucking chat. Sick of seeing your black ass in my motherfucking room.
Oh, the legend come to life. Clearly the Longsword and its counters are the most broken tools in the game. Forget the fact that the SNS has a wirebug move that gives you invincibility frames throughout almost the entirety of its long animation, as well as a back cop that also has a lot of iframes that can also be performed from neutral and gives you 4 different options to follow up with, one of which being the SNS's highest burst damage combo that it can cancel out of midway through. That was also in World, by the way. Forget the fact that the Lance also has 3 different counters, one of which allows you to chain parry literally any attack in the game, including multi-hits, and another giving your weapon a damage buff on top of a strong counter attack. Gee, where have I heard this before? Forget the fact that Heavy Bokon has so much control over the monster with status and sticky ammos that combined with its insane DPS, can gun down a monster before it has the chance to pull off a single attack. But guns don't exist in Monster Hunter, so it doesn't count. Clearly the Longsword is the problem here. In fact, it was such a problem that Capcom nerfed it in Sunbreak because people wouldn't shut the fuck up about the thing. Now if you want your risk-reward counters to actually do decent damage, you have to play inside this stupid circle. But that didn't stop people. The circle only served to make them stronger in the long run. And the Longsword once again found itself sitting alone atop of the peak. Just to prove it, watch me blitz this dog. Fuck yeah, that's what gets the adrenaline pumping. Hope you're done counting your blessings, Malzeno, cause you're next on my shit list. You know, despite counters supposedly being completely broken, it's really hard to consistently abuse them like this. You need to be good at piloting the weapon along with having a really good understanding of the monster matchup. Knowledge like which counters are appropriate against which attacks, where to position yourself, and how to follow up afterwards. Which at that point, I think it's fair to say that a player should be rewarded for learning and applying that knowledge. People always complained about the damage Longsword used to do in base rise, but there was so much memorization and execution practice required to actually draw that power out consistently. And even then, the weapon's performance would change drastically depending on the matchup. Monsters can still catch you with multi-hits, and you'll have to be good at managing your wire bugs in order to negate those with stuff like Serene Pose. The same wire bugs you'll need to maintain your circle and use your Helm Breaker. All of this also depends on whether or not the monster decides to cooperate with you. Sometimes the monster just won't perform the attack you want. Sometimes the stupid fuck monster won't get inside the stupid fucking circle. It's one of the major drawbacks of focusing on a purely reactive playstyle. A lot of people think EI Spirit Slash doesn't punish you enough for missing it, but it isn't really out of line with how other counters behave. Failing an insta-block still has you block the attack. Metsu Shoryugeki still performs the uppercut with less damage. With failing an EI Spirit Slash, at best you counter too early and deal a pittance of damage while you're left wide open after ruining your positioning. At worst, you counter too late and get face-fucked by the monster. These are punishing enough as is. It doesn't need more salt in the wound like how World handled it, where the punishment actively deterred you from using the move at all. Leveling up your gauge from successful counters is supposed to be an incentive to engage with and get better with the mechanic by feeding into one of the Longsword's core gameplay elements. This isn't any different from counters like Anchor Rage on the Lance, Counter Peak Performance on the Charge Blade, and Elemental Burst counter on the Switch Axe. But hey, that's all bullshit anyways. Just because something's hard to play well doesn't mean it's not broken. The fact is that the Longsword still does too much damage. Here, I'll prove it. Some guy made a DPS tier list based on over 4,000 speedruns that proves everything I'm saying. Ah, this is nice. After all, everybody knows that the best part of the Monster Hunter experience is watching other people do math for you. Oh shit, it's done. Let's take a look-see. Look how shitty the Lance is. How embarrassing. I can't imagine sinking much lower than oh my god. Oh, the humanity! But I don't get it. How is it this low? Even with all the counters, all the favoritism from Capcom, it's still this low? I gotta jump through all these hoops with the switch skills and the scrolls and playing the fucking circle, and you're telling me this shit is still mid? But I go on the internet, and the internet tells me it's broken, it's overpowered. But when I play the video game and I fight Primordial Malzeno with a longsword, he beats my ass with it, like he's my dad or something. But it's supposed to be overpowered. YouTube! YouTube! YouTube said it was overpowered, and YouTube wouldn't lie to me. Oh fuck. But then I watched that one YouTuber play the longsword and he sucks at it. He can't even counter a Rathian with it, let alone a Primordial Malzeno. I do that fight with my Insect Glaive and that shit don't got a good counter. But I have an easier time beating it with that than beating it with the longsword. But wait, that can't be right because the Glaive sucks! It's worse than the Lance! And everybody knows how terrible the Lance is! Wait, no! Maybe there's something wrong with the data. Yeah, that must be it. After all, there aren't enough people playing every weapon to give us a good estimate of accurate speedrun Pose has so many. You can't compare hard that you can't even follow up with nobody actually gets out these weapons. They're not real. All we gotta do is convert music to upgrades. How did we get here? It's hard to say where the bandwagon against the longsword really started. For some people it has roots back from the older games due to the weapon tripping everybody in multiplayer. Some people think it has something to do with popularity polls and usage rates, like it's some objective statement about the viability of a weapon. Some of it might be jealousy that the longsword looks visually flashier than the other weapons, or that Capcom appears to favor it over other weapons despite other weapons getting just as many if not more additions to their kits. How or where the hate started doesn't really matter to me. What I think is more important is how it's continued to perpetuate for this long. And for that, I think I might have an answer. Most Monster Hunter players are ignorant. And I'm not saying that to be mean, it's just a natural consequence of having 14 different weapon choices. Most people only actively play 1 or 2 weapons. If you're lucky, you might even dabble in a third. Because of this, most people are unaware of the nuances and execution that most other weapons have. They don't know much outside of watching a YouTube video explaining the very basics of how they conceptually play out against a training dummy. This is completely normal and isn't really a big issue in and of itself, but it becomes an issue when people decide they want to start talking about game balance. Game balance is a tricky beast, and it's probably impossible for a game like Monster Hunter to be perfectly balanced across all 14 weapons, but that doesn't stop Capcom from trying. They're actually pretty receptive to feedback, as we saw in the changes from Rise to Sunbreak, like adjusting the Charge Blade file hitboxes and making Instablock easier to use, but it's also a double-edged sword in some ways. Based on weapon usage rates from World and Rise, Longsword typically hovers around a usage rate of around 20%, with the only exception being base game Rise, in which it was disproportionately large. This could be due to a bunch of different factors, like the Longsword being the default weapon you start the game with. Nobody can say exactly why the data looks the way it does, because Capcom has never really elaborated on this data in much detail. Most people see the usage rates and interpret that Longsword is the most popular weapon in Monster Hunter, and they'd be right. However, another way of interpreting this data is that about 80% of weapon usage comes from weapons that aren't the Longsword. That is to say that despite the Longsword being the most popular weapon choice, the majority of players don't actively play the Longsword, and this is where that ignorance comes into play. Most of the criticism I see towards the Longsword come from people who don't play the weapon. A lot of people arguing that the Longsword's counters are broken are the same people who try the weapon out, miss 80% of their counters, and then argue about how broken counters are because of the 20% they did manage to land. A lot of people are unaware that the other weapons have similar mechanics and utilities to the ones that the Longsword has, some of which are arguably better than what the Longsword is capable of. A lot of people will cite speedrun statistics or somebody else's speedrun video as proof something is overpowered, while also never experiencing the absolute hell that comes with the learning and practice required to perform at that level. At the same time, people will hand-wave away an entire weapon's existence when the speedrun data shows that the Longsword gets consistently outperformed by the same 3 weapons over and over again, because it conflicts with their false narrative that the Longsword is somehow the strongest weapon in the game.
It is currently the strongest weapon in Monster Hunter Rise. As we have established, Longsword is only the strongest weapon in Rise, and even then ranged weapons outclass it.
Huh?
And I already know what you're about to say. Oh, it's because they're ranged weapons. They play too differently compared to everything else. Motherfucker, so does every single Blade Master weapon. Every weapon in these games feel, play, and function differently from one another. It's not just the gunner weapons. Rurikon, one of the biggest Monster Hunter channels on the platform, and one of the most vocal critics of the Longsword, by his own admission, doesn't really play or care about the Longsword.
Now, notice that we are in yellow, so we're going to be doing A, foresight slash. We messed it up. Have to be a little bit closer. Foresight slash requires quite a bit of practice, which I don't tend to do because, as you guys know, I don't play a whole lot of Longsword. I don't care.
Imagine if I had never played the Charge Blade before, and I screamed to the high heavens that Charge Blade was too overpowered, because counter peak performance gave it too much utility, defense, and damage opportunity for one wire bug. I complain about this day and night until finally Capcom ends up nerfing the entire weapon because of my complaints, despite never touching the weapon. How absurd would that be? Not as absurd as you might think, because that's what happened with the Longsword and Sunbreak. People who don't play the weapon, people who have no investment in the weapon, people who proclaim that a weapon is the best in the game when they don't even know what half the other weapons are even capable of, people who struggle to even tap into the aspects that supposedly make the weapon broken in the first place, bitched and complained loud enough and persistently enough until Capcom finally felt strong-armed into nerfing the entire weapon. There's so many people in this community who suddenly fancy themselves as game designers, yet most of them don't seem to understand a concept as simple as risk and reward, so let me explain it to you. in a game where bosses are easily able to chunk 40% to 80% to all of your health, if I'm going to risk my health on reacting to one of the monster's myriad of attacks with a timed, precise button press with an active window of only 0.283 seconds, I should be rewarded well for that. If I dedicate tens or even hundreds of hours studying and practicing a matchup so I can perform this trick consistently, I should be rewarded well for that. If I'm willing to repeat this arduous process against the 87 monsters that exist in this game, I should be rewarded well for that. In the current state of Sunbreak, the dual blades pressing the A button once is more rewarding, more consistent, and safer than landing an EI Spirit Slash. If you're going to complain that a weapon is broken or overpowered compared to everything else, you should at least know what everything else is capable of beyond the hearsay bullshit you saw on Reddit and Twitter. At the very least, you should play the weapon that you're complaining about before suggesting that it needs changing. Balancing is still important in PvE games, but they should be directed towards the things that need it. A weapon's strengths and weaknesses go beyond the immediate damage number you see on screen. You would know if you actually played them. You know, after going through all this, I think I finally realized something. Almost every weapon in these games have some really strong mechanics or moves that help you deal with different things in different ways. It's part of what gives each weapon a unique identity and makes them all fun to play. Almost. I think I'm finally able to come to terms with myself. Longsword? I don't hate you after all. I just hate people. And that's great! Because now I can see you for all your faults and favors. You've never been the best, but you're not the worst either. You're just fine enough as you are. Most of all though, I just enjoy playing it. As a counter machine or as a traditional beat stick, it's fun to play. And you know what? I like playing the lance too. And the insect glaive, and the sword and shield, and I don't know about that one, but sure, fuck it, you can be cool too sometimes. Oh, what the fuck is that thing?